First Generation, The Autobiography by Mary Tamm. Read by the Timekeys. Romana. Chapter 17, 1978. The Stones of Blood. This is a court of law, young man, not a court of justice. Oliver Wendell Holmes. Apropos of the strong female characters in this new series of Doctor Who, as mentioned in the previous chapter, we had a prime example in this story, namely Vivian Fay,
played so superbly by Susan Engel,
an actress I had always greatly admired, notably for her prolific and well-respected work on stage. The part was originally offered to Honor Blackman, who declined as she felt the professor had all the best material. I set off for rehearsals in a mood of high anticipation, for not only did I have the immense privilege of working with Susan to look forward to, but I was also to meet Beatrix Lehman, playing the part of the above-mentioned Professor Amelia Rumford. Beatrix was another highly revered actor, aged 75 at the time, but still with the energy of a 30-year-old. I particularly admired her choice of car, a sporty little Lancia, which she drove around London at recklessly high speeds, a girl after my own heart. As the read-through commenced, Tom, John, and I eyed each other with delight and trepidation, for it was already obvious we were in the presence of acting greats here. We would have to raise our game. It was a challenge, and one of the aspects of filming a long series I enjoyed the most. To be kept on one's toes by the regular injection into the working process of fresh new acting blood. A very appropriate metaphor here, if ever there was one in view of the title. Both ladies turned out to be charm itself, and we soon developed a strong bond, especially as I had scenes with both of them. These were so very pleasant and relaxed to rehearse and record after the male-oriented storylines that had gone before. I always find male actors so competitive. I became particularly close to Susan, even more so when she gave me a lift down to our location filming, when we visited a stately home on the way. She was a delight. The quest for the third segment of The Key to Time took the Doctor and Romana to a stone circle called the Nine Travelers, represented by an authentic stone circle dating from the early Bronze Age called the King's Men, part of the Rollright Stones complex near Long Compton in Oxfordshire. The writer for this story, David Fisher, had drawn heavily upon British mythology for the plot, which had supernatural overtones. He was inspired by many legends, such as tales of stones, called cycloliths, leaving a circle to travel mysteriously around the countryside, as well as the belief that the number of stones in a circle appears to vary from time to time. The location was suitably mysterious, but absolutely freezing cold. We filmed our scenes at the Rollright Stones with hot water bottles strapped to our middles, as well as several layers of thermal underwear. Poor Beatrix suffered terribly and looked quite blue around the lips as the days wore on. I was glad to complete our filming there, especially as I had a new technique to deal with. We were filming with an OB, outside broadcast unit, which I had not come across before. This meant that our director, Darrell Blake, was sitting in a large white van, viewing the action on monitors, and relaying his instructions via a mic to the floor assistant, or should that be ground assistant, who then passed on his commands and suggestions to us. It was a frustrating, slow, and isolating process not to have our director with us, on the set, as it were, and I was particularly fond of Darrell. He was my favorite director on the series, and became a good friend together with his wife, the actress Anne Cunningham. The famous cliffhanger scene, where I am literally left dangling on the edge of a cliff, was filmed on location, on a little ledge, and then superimposed via the usual blue screen in the studio. Tom had a shot on location where he is seen pushing me over the edge. He refused to do it, saying, quite rightly, that any children watching would be horrified at the character's actions, even though it transpires, of course, that it is not really him. So he simply voiced his lines in the studio later. One night, the TARDIS was stolen. It transpired that a group of students had borrowed it for a dare, which gave the props team a few nail-biting hours until it was returned the next day. It seems extraordinary to me now that we only had the one, but again, our budget simply would not stretch to a spare. I went back to the Stones years later, in 2004, to present a documentary for the DVD release. I learned a great deal more about them then. I simply had not had the time, when I was working on Who, to absorb much of their history. It was a slightly surreal experience to go back, as of course the Stones were eternally unchanged, except for a little extra lichen here and there. It was again absolutely freezing cold, but I had preempted this and had dressed with layers of jumpers, 5 in all, and a woolen peaked cap. There was the added pleasure of violent winds and rain, and as the improvised makeup area, in the form of a tent, had been blown away, I had to repair to my car, where I made myself up with the aid of a rearview mirror. I interviewed a white witch, who told me of the rituals performed there at certain times of the year, and a druid, who told me more of the same. The archaeologist was fascinating to talk to, but the person I enjoyed interviewing the most was the water diviner. He does not appear on the DVD, but he showed me how to divine with a rod, and walked me along the energy lines of the stones, where I had to go at divining myself. I was amazed to feel the trembling along the rod, and my arms as I held it. What mysterious forces were at work here, I asked him. The reply is too long and complicated for me to even remember, let alone write about it, which is probably why he was not in the final cut, but reinforced my belief that there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. The documentary also had a long and technical commentary, which I had to speak while walking around the circle. The script had been sent to my computer the night before, and as I had no time to learn it, I recorded it onto my mobile phone, which was rather unsatisfactory, but I had no choice and had to make the best of a bad job. If you look carefully, you can see the lead of the mobile's earpiece peeking out from behind my hair in some scenes. All in all, though, it was a wonderful experience to have performed a presenting role, something I had always wanted to do, but which, believe me, is harder than it looks. I had a few difficult moments keeping a straight face, especially when I was interviewing the witch, but on the whole, given the shortness of time, 1 day, the budget, 0, and the weather, foul, we managed to make not too bad a job of it. Back to the Stones of Blood and the studio. Because the first episode was underrunning, Tom, John, and I had what we thought was a brilliant idea. The Stones of Blood was the 100th Doctor Who story, and we decided to improvise a new scene in which Romana and K9 would celebrate the Doctor's 751st birthday, complete with a cake and a birthday present. A new scarf. We rehearsed the brief scene and showed it to Daryl, who loved it. He became very enthusiastic about the concept of the Doctor's birthday and ordered a specially made cake for the occasion, candles and all. Sadly, it was not to be. David Fisher, Graham Williams, and Anthony Reed were concerned about the scene's irrelevance to the storyline, and our very funny, we thought, sketch was axed, to our eternal disappointment. We consoled ourselves with a private party where the aforesaid cake was cut and eaten while we toasted the 100th story with a bottle of champagne. I only wish we had written that birthday scene down and kept it for posterity. I had very much enjoyed the story of Stones when I first read the script and was looking forward to the scenes with the Megara, based by David on the mythical Greco-Roman Eumenides, goddesses who persecuted those guilty of a crime. In the studio, we stepped onto the set, very brightly lit and terribly hot, with steeply raked floors which were difficult to move on. We started shooting the scenes which seemed interminable, and were confronted with the difficulty of reacting to the Megara, who, of course, were invisible at this point. We craned our necks and adjusted our eye lines accordingly, with many a note on where we were going wrong, and consequent stops and starts. I appreciated John Leeson even more at this point, realizing that his performances in rehearsal made the studio time easier. It had not been possible to have actors floating about in mid-air at the Acton Hilton. How thoughtlessly inconvenient, but in retrospect, it would have given us something to work against had the actors who voiced the judges, Gerald Cross and David McAllister, been present at the read-through at least. Budgetary constraints yet again. When I saw the finished episodes, I was very disappointed. The Megara had been conceived by David Fisher as flying metal orbs, but Daryl had felt that this was too similar to some elements of Star Wars, and consequently altered them to sets of twinkling lights sets, which looked insubstantial and weedy, especially against the glaring backdrop of the studio. Being an avid special effects aficionado, I suppose I am more critical than most, and so felt the finished effects really let the story down, although again, I know most of the viewers loved them. On the whole, though, I always have very warm and happy memories of this tale, especially when I am having a special treat on a cold day, a little, and to me, hitherto unknown, snack from the story. Sausage sandwiches. I was about halfway through the series and I began to realize that it was nigh on impossible to have an equally strong leading character alongside the doctors, mainly because of the half-hour format. There simply is no time to have two adventurers going off on different tangents and tying the stories together. Also, and again, because of this sci-fi genre, someone has to be a sounding board for the audience in explaining the mysteries of the script, which are often technical, thereby reverting to the usual questions of why, what is it, Doctor? Or, Doctor, what does it mean? I'd hoped that there would be a possibility of role reversal here, and that the Doctor might occasionally turn round to Romana and ask the same questions. Perfectly feasible and credible in the light of her being a recent graduate of the Time Lord Academy. But alas, it was never to be. It was very much Tom's show, and he guarded his turf fiercely, which was understandable, as he had been in it for years and had established a popular and iconic character. Furthermore, and in light of my earlier remarks in this chapter about the male hierarchy of the television industry, it could never have happened, as there simply was no precedent of a female taking the initiative. I was disillusioned, especially as Graham had promised so much, but reflected again on the vagaries of my business, and decided to just get on with it. But I did already know that I would not and could not do another series. The work was hard, and the rewards of the part extremely limited. There was, in my mind, nowhere the character could go, and when I told Graham all this later in the Key to Time schedule, during the Armageddon factor, he took me out to lunch and promised me the Earth, more money, more control, more costumes. He even asked if I could stay if Tom left. This was staggering. Was he actually proposing to sack Tom in favor of me? I knew there was not much love lost between them, but I'd imagined that there was, at least, a mutual respect. I declined, knowing that none of these promises would be fulfilled, but Graham persisted in trying to get me to stay, right up to the very last day of shooting, blind to the fact that I was adamant about going. So many fans have asked me why I did not have a regeneration scene at the end of my time as Romana. It would have been an ideal opportunity for innovation. She was the first-time lady companion, after all, and her reincarnation could have been spectacular. The reason is simple. Graham simply could not believe that I would not return. I was very disappointed not to have that scene in the next series, and remain the ever-frustrated first generation of the Lady Romana Devortua Lunda.